people who aren't aware, you're Liam O'Mara. You're running for Congress in California. Could you just tell people a little bit about your campaign and who you are?
Sure. So I'm Liam O'Mara. I'm a college history professor, and I teach the history of ideas and focus a lot on the Middle East. And I am running for Congress in the 42nd in Southwest Riverside County. My platform is primarily built around economic issues because the district is demographically pretty purple, but historically votes pretty red. And the winning margin is always the independents, and focusing on the areas of broad overlap help a lot. I'm very much a progressive, but think of myself more as a progressive populist or a left populist. And I try to talk about a lot of progressive policy issues in ways that I think will make more sense to people in my district. So that's the short.
Gotcha. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that, running as a progressive, as you say, in kind of a Republican district, one that's been occupied by a Republican congressman who's up for re-election. Ken Calvert is the incumbent, who you're running to oust. Can you tell us a little bit about his record and what it's been like running as a progressive in your district?
Yeah, so I just recently turned 46, and Ken Calvert was elected to his current position in the very first election I was legally able to vote in.
Wow.
Voted in when I was 18. He's been in for 28 years now, which is a bit absurd, especially since he used to give all the lip service to the term limits and stepping down and whatnot. Here, he's been saying this for decades now, literally. In 28 years, he has never chaired a committee. He has produced almost no legislation, unless you count the whole renaming post offices sort of thing. His one signature accomplishment is his connection to E-Verify, which is one of those things used to basically penalize the undocumented for the businesses that are hiring them in the first place. And he definitely runs a lot on that anti-immigrant rhetoric in the area. He is frequently listed as one of the top 10 most corrupt people in the House of Representatives. He is funded 98% by corporations. He usually goes about a decade or so in between town halls, and when he does, they're tightly scripted and controlled affairs. He never answers constituent questions. His office will literally say, well, Mr. Calvert has won enough elections that he feels he doesn't need to talk to people who didn't vote for him. And so he doesn't. And to me, that violates just everything about what this position is supposed to be. They represent us. They work for us. The goal here is to stand up and to tell people, I'm not always going to agree with you on every issue, but I'm always going to come back and talk to you. We will sit down, we'll have coffee, we'll discuss the issues. I'll lay out my position, I'll hear yours, and we'll see what we can do with that. And I'm never going to take you for granted. And I think that our incumbent has been doing that for ages, in addition to being one of the most corrupt people we have there. He's generally used, especially given his seniority and power in the Republican Party in California, as a backroom negotiator. So he's the one, you've heard all that Trump rhetoric about draining the swamp. Ken Calvert is the swamp.
Yeah. Just to kind of ask you about that. So you said that he's a 98% financed, did you say out of state?
But by corporations.
By corporations. How does that compare to your campaign?
Zero.
Yeah.
The campaign is entirely people powered. It's all progressive money. It's all from people who actually want change, and I want to represent ordinary people. As far as I'm concerned, the people that we have in Congress today should be wearing NASCAR jackets while their owners plastered all over them and forced to wear them on the floor of the House, because they work for them, not for us. And that has to change. And until it does, we're not going to get much of anything done. I mean, Congress, I think, has earned its 7% approval rating. It can't get anything done for the American people because it's concerned to protect its corporate donors.
You've talked about how Ken Calvert. Go ahead, Gavin. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering about that. The Democratic Party, you're not really following their traditional model of campaign finance in that sense. They have no problem lining their pockets with corporate cash of just about any lobby that wishes to fund their campaigns. Have they been helpful to your campaign, the DCC see, or have they, abandoned your campaign and kind of left you in the dark like they have so many other progressive corporate-free candidates that are really leading the way for how we should be running campaigns?
It's interesting. There's a few ways in which it's a mixed bag. Honestly, I am deliberately running against the grain and trying to do something that I think would help Democrats to compete all across this country. Progressives, populists, literal leftists used to do really well in the heartland of this country. Democrats used to dominate farm country, but we stopped talking about issues that matter to people across the kitchen tables. And we've really lost touch and let the Republicans swoop in there. And generally speaking, the largest Democratic organizations like the D-Trip are interested only when a district is already majority Democrat. If it's purple or red, they don't care, which as far as I'm concerned gives us a bit of freedom, a bit of an opportunity to work on the sort of messaging and tactics that I think would work in this country as a whole. There are, to be fair, a lot of Democrats running who do not suckle on the corporate teat, so to speak, who are willing to actually serve the people. But the institutions have grown more conservative and more corrupted by the power and money that's involved there. So there's no direct support from DCCC, and honestly, I'm not uncomfortable with that at all. I'm quite happy because it comes with so many strings attached that I wouldn't be comfortable with it. It would defy the whole purpose of running for me. But the state party did endorse me, and did so in way back when, and the county activists have been extremely enthusiastic. The county party is an enthusiastic supporter, so I do have support from the Democratic Party. My endorsement in the pre-endorsement conference they do there, where they canvass all the people in the area, the activists and party faithful, to see who the state party should endorse, my support was unanimous. There was literally not a single vote cast for anybody else or for no endorsement. So my support on the ground was always pretty good from core committed Democrats, but I also try to bring in a lot of independent voices and people who aren't served by that, and trying to bring that together.
Yeah, that seems to echo the kind of broader congressional, or the way that most of the more progressive congressional candidates we've talked to have spoken about the, support from the Democratic Party, is that the more, tangible, more beneficial support has come from the state and local level of the party. You've talked about how the incumbent, Ken Calvert, is really reluctant or even refuses to engage in relationships with people in your district. I wonder how you've been able to build relationships as a first-time candidate in the midst of a global pandemic.
The pandemic has definitely complicated things. There's no question of that. We had built a bit of an infrastructure already that we could build on, that we could continue to grow with. I now do a weekly show, a little virtual town hall where people get to tune in. We talk about a different issue each week. People get to throw out questions. I'm extremely responsive on social media. I mean, even Republicans will post questions, as long as they're not, completely and pointlessly overtly trollish. I'll answer the question. And we're trying to set up a sort of kitchen table chats sort of framework using the Twitch stream, so it gets more use than just for the weekly town halls, and sort of open that up to regular Q&As and talking to people. We were doing a lot of door knocking and a ton of public events and getting out there. I am not going to do that for the rest of the year, because honestly, I think it models bad behavior. I think if we want people to slow this thing down until there's a vaccine, then I shouldn't be having volunteers or being out myself knocking doors and really pressing the flesh. I've done a few things. We've been to, some Black Lives. There was 2 Black Lives Matter protests we went down to, but in all those, still social distancing, PPE, and all that. But there won't be much of it. What we're focusing on, and the key to flipping the district, is direct voter contact, which is going to be the phone banking. So we have a large-scale phone banking operation, and most of the money that comes in is going to go to supporting that, as well as the social media operation and ads that we can run there, and then me making direct calls, sending out emails, everything like that. We're going to try and touch as many people in the district as we can that we need, and more than once. And I'm focusing on the people who don't vote much and on the independents, so we can increase the vote share total.
Gotcha. Something else I was interested in and wanted to give you a chance to talk about was your experience as an educator. You talked about being a professor, and specifically a professor of Middle East history. How has that impacted your platform and your values as a candidate?
Well, I mean, tremendously in a vast number of ways, but most of them are fairly subtle. I mean, other than the fact that I definitely come across as a nerd, you know, and I definitely am much more comfortable being authentic as opposed to sort of trying to emulate the more super polished candidates out there. I'd rather just be myself. And I have a very casual approach in my my lecturing. There's definitely some similarity there between my approach to my students and the accessibility I try there in the campaign. The main way it impacts things is in the policies itself. I have an extremely policy-centric campaign, but that's one of the challenges too, because politics isn't usually policy-driven. Most voters aren't really interested in the details of your policy. They want to hear something personal about you. So we try to like split the difference as much as we can. Where people want to talk about policy, I will dive into the weeds with people and talk about it. I don't have to be like, well, you know, let me get back to you once I talk to my policy advisors. No, I spent years thinking about what I wanted to run on and how, but we do try to talk at least a bit more generally about myself and to focus on the more relatable issues as well. But it certainly affects my economic stances. It affects my foreign policy. There's a ton of areas in which there's a direct connection between what I do there and what I'm doing here.
One of the more personal questions, like you just brought up, but we wanted to ask you about is you came to college later in life. You know, you really worked as a working class kind of blue collar guy throughout your 20s. It wasn't until you said that you were in your 30s that you were able to kind of go to college. And I wondered what your experience is comparing to somebody who joined the white collar class as a professor later in life. How has that influenced your ability to look at, you know, the overall predicament in America? I feel like one of the problems that Democrats typically have is the people who are on the wealthier side of the liberal argument. They typically don't see the working class struggle as a valuable part of the Democratic platform.
One of the things I think that has frustrated me the most about the American approach to class is this polite fiction we tell ourselves about a middle class and that we're really a middle class country. If you work for a wage, you're working class. Doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you're a ditch digger or a college professor. If you're getting paid to be there, you're in the working class. And we tend to downplay that and to create this artificial divide and a sense of like weird elitism between white collar jobs and working class jobs. The truth is, I never took off my steel toe boots. You know, I mean, I still very much connect with, and, you know, that's how I think of things. If I want to get something done, my first impulse isn't to like, I don't know, I got to build a shed in the backyard. I'm going to go build a shed in the backyard. You know, I still think that way. And I think that that's sort of important. I understand a lot of the struggles that people have. I never expected to go to college. I mean, granted, I was always a nerd. I was always reading. You know, I was one of those people that always had a book in their bag or something and would rip it out on the bus. You know, but I was working stiff. I was a fry cook. I was a longshoreman. You know, and I don't view that as kind of like I did my time and now I get to have this really cool job or something. To me, it's the same thing. I'm still working for a wage. So my class identity in the working class never changed. And I'm there because I want to do something that suits my skill set. I want to help people. I want to give back in some way. And helping to break through some of the indoctrination and helping, you know, college students to think and become the leaders of tomorrow. I mean, that makes me happy. You know, I feel like I'm doing something of value in society.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. On your campaign website, you advocated for the use of the universal basic income to offset automation of production, kind of similar to how Andrew Yang proposed it on his in his political campaign for president. What would you say to critics from the left who say that UBI would kind of further entrench that economic divide, that class divide between the owner class and the class that relies on universal basic income?
Yeah, so I use the terms universal basic income, and there is a strong connection there. I mean, a lot of my support base is pretty evenly split up amongst like Bernie Kratz and Yang Gangers, you know, with a bunch of Marianne fans and whatever, you know, thrown in here and there, Greens and all that. But there are some key differences. The approach that you take to UBI in terms of the funding for it and some of the ultimate goal between, say, the model that Yang put out and mine are a little bit different, because I don't see it as a way to dismantle the welfare state and help the gig economy so much as I see it as a way to abolish poverty. But I talk a lot about automation because it literally is, it's a fact. It's something that I'm happy that he did raise a lot. There are again, minor differences in the way we're talking about funding it and in some of the goals there, but automation's been a thing for as long as we've been around and in cities and coming up with new ways to like save labor. And every time you save labor, we have to come up with new jobs and put people to work somewhere else. It has always been a way to innovate, and would be if we were still investing in education. Since education spending is falling per capita, we're not getting the benefit of producing a lot of new jobs and innovating. We're actually falling behind. I mean, the United States was the leader in solar cell technology and all that kind of stuff. I mean, battery technology, we've given that up. We stopped investing as much in R&D. And when you look at that collapse in our investment in people, and you look also at the fact that with the rise of AI, it's touching so many other jobs. It's not just manufacturing, it's service sector and white collar jobs. They're all going to disappear, and then half of our jobs are going to go away. We have to do something about this. I tend to connect it to a bunch of other issues there. I tend to connect it to investment in our economy of, like, say, a Green New Deal. I tend to connect it to education spending, and I'll connect it to things like a jobs guarantee. Because I want, for example, what I do for a living doesn't count into GDP. As far as the economists are concerned, I do no productive labor. And I'm like, excuse me, I work 80 hours a week. I think that my labor seems to have some value, but it doesn't currently. We need to change the way we understand jobs. And a basic income, along with the jobs guarantee, offers the possibility of doing that, of letting things like home care workers and education and healthcare and tons of other areas, the arts, music, it lets it become important, viable, productive contributions to society in economic terms, where right now they're really not.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, especially as we're coming out of this pandemic and we see somewhere around 40% of small businesses closing, I don't think there's any way that we're going to be able to get out of this without UBI or massively robust Social Security expansion. So yeah, I appreciate that you're advocating for that and included in your program or platform. Sorry. One other thing I wanted to ask you was just how exactly you intend to affect the progressive change you champion from within the United States Congress. Would you consider joining or helping to form like a corporate PAC-free caucus, kind of like Congresswoman AOC has talked about doing, to put pressure from the left on the kind of increasingly pro-corporate Democratic leadership, the Nancy Pelosi types of the party?
Yeah, see, this is the thing. It always comes back to, how are you going to fix things? How are you going to change things? And we do that to people running for Congress. We do that to people running for president. And realistically, no one can. These are systemic problems. The way to do it is to tackle the systems themselves. And the only way you can get systemic change involves changing a number of important laws. We'll only get there when we have enough clean people in. So yes, we have to get the AOCs in, and we have to keep them in, and we have to keep increasing the number. Which means it really does, and it's hard as that is, it falls down to us to support the clean money candidates across the country. I've been doing that for years, sending money to people running all over the country. And it falls into some of the same arguments people often make about their own efficacy. If I can pivot slightly from, what would I do to what we can all do together to fix this thing, people can say, well, my one vote doesn't matter. Yes, it does. It really does. But also, what about my $1? What about my $5? People can think, well, it's only $5. They'll get it somewhere else. Well, just think of it this way. If several thousand people donate the price of one cup of coffee a month, just take that up a bit. You see how much that grows? If 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people give the price of one cup of coffee per month, $5 doesn't seem like much that we would miss. Right? Most of us could get by without an extra $5, right? And so that tempts you into thinking it doesn't really matter. But there's a multiplier effect when more of us get behind the clean money candidates. And when we all throw in our $5, it can create the potential to finally push back against these corporate candidates. We can push back against the dirty tactics they use with that money. You put enough of us in there and we will change the laws. We will get a more representative Congress. We will get to where we can have actually functioning multiple parties in this system. We'll get the money out of it, and we'll get back to doing the business of the people. Right now, under the current system, no one has an incentive to change it. The people that are in there that got there through the system have no real incentive to do it. And the only way to put pressure on them is to build up enough of a groundswell that it's putting more and more of us in there, and it imperils their ability to get in.
Yeah, and I think the primarying is so important for that very reason, because it teaches those incumbent politicians that they do have a threat, an actual left flank that will take them out if need be, as we just saw happen in New York City.
Yeah, and just in any kind of primaries, though, too, we often will complain about the candidates we'll get in general elections, but then people don't turn up for primaries.
True.
I was actually kind of pleased, really. I mean, honestly, absurdly pleased, but the turnout we had in the primary here in March was the highest it's been since the 1990s. I mean, Ken Calvert's share of the vote was the lowest it's been since the 90s. More people did turn up. Historically, a lot of Democrats and independents don't turn up as much in the primaries. And then we leave it to the most conservative voters. And then we complain about the candidates we get in November and use that as a reason not to vote. Well, show up in the primaries and pick a candidate that you can actually get behind. And then when they're the ones that are there on the ballot in November, it's easier to get even more people to turn up.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, you said your district is often decided over who's able to kind of capture the independent vote. And I think one of the ways that the, progressive populist left is sort of misidentified in the mainstream or more combative media is on our gun policy, as if we're often radicals with gun policy. I looked at your website and I wondered if you could sort of talk about your position on that. And, you mentioned that outside from Yemen, we're the only country that doesn't require licensing to possess and sell firearms. I wondered if you could just kind of talk about what your platform is on that and how we can solve the gun violence epidemic in this country without, infringing on a value that a lot of people really care about.
Yeah, it's really a tricky one there, because I simultaneously am very concerned with the level of gun violence in this country and with the number of shootings, because it puts us way out of league with the entire rest of the developed world.
Yeah.
But I also am not generally in favor of bans or infringing on people's rights. I mean, some people are just hobbyists. I mean, my father is not a threat to anyone, but he likes blowing things up on the dry lake bed. As far as I'm concerned, it's a weird hobby, but everyone's got to do them, So I don't think that we need necessarily to go after things like that. And then I think the way to really tackle it for me personally would be a basic training and certification scheme for things. So who has what they're doing with it. And we have at least some oversight on the whole thing. And right now, the laws are such a bizarre patchwork between localities and states and whatnot and the federal government that no one can actually impose any kind of laws that will make any difference. I hate the canonical right-wing cases like Chicago. You can just drive to Indiana and buy whatever you want. It's not far from Chicago, and walk right back in. Just pile the guns in your trunk and drive right back over. So what Chicago passes is irrelevant. It has no impact on anything. That said, so the bigger picture for me really is we have to tackle the root causes of the violence. And while the accessibility of the weapons increases the scale of violence, which is why I'm in favor of some regulation there, it's not really the core driving factor. There you have to look at much more at our declining socioeconomic stance, the fact that we're now 17th in the world in living standards and falling, that we've lost 20% of the middle class, that the wages have been stagnant for more than 40 years. There are a lot of people who are depressed. The suicide rate amongst millennials is going through the roof because people are still stuck living at their parents' house at 30.
Yeah.
And it puts a ton of pressure on you. You can't pay the rent. You can't pay your medical bills.
Yep.
We have more and more. I mean, think of all the medical bankruptcies that we have in this country. That happens nowhere else in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So how are we going to tackle the obscene suicide rate? Think about the healthcare aspects of it. Not all gun violence is mental health induced, but some of it is, right? What if we had true access to medical care for everybody that could take care of these things? What if we got back to just safer communities in general with more social workers and more basic services available to people so you didn't fall into that desperation in the first place? It's a much more interconnected problem.
I totally. And I think you're making such a good point. And I think it's a good explanation for why often we see the Democratic framing on the issue, which totally ignores that context and only focuses on gun ownership and totally ignores those extenuating circumstances. And maybe the reason for that is because Democrats don't take money from the NRA, but they do take money from, the health insurance industries, the police unions, a lot of these groups that it's in their best interest to keep the system in place as it is, which leads to these socioeconomic desperation that leads to so much of the violence that we're seeing.
And the rhetoric on both sides is wildly dishonest. My incumbent said that the reason we get shootings is because people don't go to church enough and they play violent video games. And I'm like, dude, do you think this is 1950 or something?
Yeah.
That kind of bizarre thinking. We figured out a long time ago that was not it. And oh God, I don't know, just look at Europe. Look at Japan. Japan plays a whole lot more violent video games than we do. The Europeans are a whole lot more irreligious than we are. Neither of them have the shootings, right? But what do they have? They have an effective social safety net. They have universal health care, right? They have far lower rates of poverty. Extreme poverty in the US is at the same rate as it is in the occupied West Bank and in Albania, the poorest countries in Europe. It blows my mind that we tolerate that in the US. But the major parties, for the most part, are incentivized not to talk about the deeper issues. And for me, that's one of the rationales for my entire campaign. I am pissed off that people keep talking about slapping Band-Aids on hemorrhages. We have to talk about the real underlying issues. We have to go to the root of these things and solve problems, not just dance around them and play with the symptoms.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Liam, we're really thankful that you came and joined us and talked to us today. Where could people go to support you?
So the website is pretty easy, liamomara.org, liamomara.org. And then I'm pretty active on social media, so on Twitter, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. Usually if you search with like Liam O'Mara the Fourth, because that's tagged my name on the social media profiles, but not generally in the name itself, just in the handles. Any road. But the social media, the website there, and there's short links as well for volunteering and donating. So like bit.ly/LiamVol, bit.ly/LiamDonate are good ways to jump in right away there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Have a good one.